Nintendo's remake of Paper Mario The Thousand-Year Door has brought significant but controversial changes to the game, most notably Vivian. Now, in the original game, it's been debated whether Vivian's exact identity was transgender or a male. Yeah, we're still arguing about this almost 20 years later, but that's because with modern audiences, video games can't come out with any type of controversy. So when localization made significant changes to this new game, people are a little upset about it. In fact, I would dare say that Kotaku, who wrote an article about this, has kind of misled readers quite a bit in regards to what the original context of Vivian's background goes. So, in the original Japanese release, Vivian introduces themselves and the Shadow Sirens as the Shadow Sisters, and then Beldam, who's notoriously known for bullying Vivian, angrily corrects them, saying, "You're a man, aren't you?" Which led many to believe that Vivian was always intended to be a transgender woman. I guess at least on the left-leaning forums and left-leaning websites like Kotaku, which we'll get back to them in a minute. Now, me and several others just thought maybe this implied that Vivian likes to cross-dress. So thinking about 2004, cross-dressing was a little bit more taboo. You had movies like Tu Wong Fu back in the day and Mrs. Doubtfire, where it was always comedy when males would dress as cross-dressers. So I figured it was something a little slapstick, something a little comedic, considering that the LGBTQ narrative really wasn't around back then. It was a little bit more taboo. Now, in Super Paper Mario, which came out in 2007, the Japanese version describes Vivian as Otokonoko, which I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, which is used for male to female cross-dressers and extremely feminine boys. Again, if you got to think about it, back then in 2004, there wasn't so much of an LGBTQ plus narrative being promoted out there. It wasn't a thing that was really thought or discussed about. And in my opinion, Vivian was always considered a cross-dresser, which to me, cross-dressing and being transgender are two entirely separate things. They're not one and the same at all, but people tend to get them confused, especially this day and age. Now, in the original game's English localization, it seems like Nintendo avoided the topic altogether, with Vivian being berated for being ugly rather than transgender. So they would say, dialogue that is very vague. It never directly said any of this out there. But now in the new remake, the new lines of dialogue, I guess they kind of just wanted to just not be vague with it anymore, because Vivian flat out says that it took them a while to realize that they were their sister, not their brother. So their usual bullying feels heavier. This screenshot has caused such a debate online where there's two different ends of the spectrum. For example, Kotaku is the left-leaning side, Bounded into Comics is the right-leaning side, and they both wrote about this. So there's one half of fans that are celebrating this localization, saying that Nintendo came out and that transgender LGBTQ plus is won. And then there's the right-leaning side, which I admittedly lean towards that more, that feel that they're misleading the audiences quite a bit. So with Kotaku, you could see that they are basically talking about the game has restored the trans identity that was kept hidden for so many years about Vivian. And I feel that they're not really giving the whole story, especially when it comes to Super Paper Mario confirming that they were a cross-dresser. Now, there might be some of you guys saying, why the hell does this matter? It's just a video game character. Why are you getting so angry? Honestly, it's more frustrating when you think about a lot of things that video game companies have done when it comes to localization, especially for modern audiences. They tend to want to plant narratives. They tend to want to plant agendas in their video games that weren't originally intended in there. So in 2004, again, like I said, cross-dressing was something that was a little bit more of a slapstick type of comedic thing. Again, you think of movies like Tu Wong Fu, Mrs. Doubtfire, and when you think of Japanese culture, the cross-dressing thing has always been something that's been a little bit of a comedy act. So I thought originally with Vivian, that's what they were going for. They were intending it to be something a little bit more silly with the character. Not exactly comedic relief, because the character itself is a little bit more of an underdog type, but I never thought once that, they're actually a transgender. Because, again, in 2004, Nintendo didn't want to focus that and push that on children. They didn't want to make it where children were being exposed to that. And even then, the topic wasn't that high of a debate. Now, I'm not trying to be some kind of bigot here, but let's be real. Let's think logistically. All right. Back then in 2004, when you seen Nintendo, they were clean cut. They played it safe. They didn't even want religion in video games. A lot of stuff was censored. Nowadays, with modern audiences, again, you get people that want to push this woke narrative, and localization is notorious for it when it comes to video games. Think of all the games that have come out recently, like Stellar Blade, that have been censored for various reasons, and now Paper Mario fell victim to it. And think of the other stuff that's been censored in this game. For example, the fat shaming from Bowser was taken out of the game. Yeah, he tells a Goomba or a Koopa Troopa to do some sit-ups, that they're looking a little out of shape, and this was deemed offensive by people. Yeah, telling people to do sit-ups and work out was deemed offensive and fat shaming in this video game. That's where we're at in today's society, guys, that people are more worried about trans representation and changing lines of dialogue for a character to make them transgender instead of a cross-dresser, and completely removing fat shaming from the game, because we can't have that, right? We can't have fat shaming in our video games. On top of that, there was a controversy with Goombella being catcalled when they go into Rogueport. They took out the catcalling because that was seen as misogynistic, right? We can't have toxic masculinity in our video games. We have to completely change the context of some of these scenes and make them feel a little bit more empty of a shell. This was one of my most favorite video games of all time when I was younger, and I think it's one of the greatest video games of all time, but unfortunately, localization once again plays a huge part in creating all these new changes to video games for these modern audiences. And that's honestly, that's my issue when it comes to calling out woke, is that stuff gets changed, stuff gets shoehorned and forced in. Sure, is it a big deal? Not really, but you give them an inch, they take a mile. They start to make changes like this to games that should be preserved. Why can't we get Paper Mario Thousand-Year Door in its original form, where the dialogue is originally what it was? Why can't we get it presented the way that it was originally supposed to be presented, without narratives being pushed into it? I've never subscribed to the thing that, oh, Vivian's a transgender, because again, in 2004, that wasn't a thing. Just like with Birdo, that was promoted as a cross-dresser as well, but people changed that into a transgender ideology as well. I'm sorry, I can't talk over myself because I'm over here thinking about all the changes to dialogue, so I might as well change my dialogue. Anyways, this has been a pretty heated topic. I want to know your thoughts down below. Let me know in the comment section. Subscribe if you haven't.